today I want to talk about gratitude, because I think that's the core of what we ought to be feeling this time of year: gratitude to God, gratitude to other people. And so I think we've forgotten this, though. I think these are some of the things that we've forgotten. We've forgotten as a culture our history, okay? We came to this holiday. You know, they have these holidays in other cultures in the fall, but Thanksgiving is an American holiday. And we remember the Puritans who came here to flee religious persecution, to start a new place. It was basically a church that came in the first ship. And they came here to America to establish this ability to worship the Lord. And they were thankful for it and had a meal with some Native Americans. And as the years went by, that became to be celebrated off and on. And then after the Battle of Gettysburg, Lincoln made it a national holiday, and Thanksgiving is a big deal in our country. It really is. But I want to go back and talk about some of the things we've forgotten about Thanksgiving. One of them is the Mayflower Compact. It was written on November 11th, 1620, William Bradford, and he talked about why we're starting in this new country. And it's taught in the schools, in the schoolhouse today. If you were to go, a lot of times it's taught like this. And I want to read this quote. We whose names, this is from the Mayflower Compact, we whose names are underwritten have undertaken a voyage to plant the first colony. Of course, Jamestown was the first colony. But anyway, this is the way a lot of people were taught it in school. But I wonder what's missing. There are words missing in teaching it this way. Okay, let's look at the words that are missing. In the name of God, amen. We whose names are underwritten have undertaken for the glory of God and advancement of the Christian faith a voyage to plant the first colony. Now, what is missing in the first version from the second? God is missing. And the purpose for which we really came, people really came to this country. And does it matter if we simply take a few words out of history? I mean, are you really rewriting it? I mean, you're just leaving a few things out, right? Does it have any effect on a child who's reading about the Pilgrims to leave those yellow parts out? If you simply extract everything about God for the reason for us coming to this country, it makes a difference. You bet it does. And so I want to remind us today why the Pilgrims came here. They came here because they wanted to build a Christian nation. They wanted to build a place where you could worship the Lord, and they did it to advance the Christian faith. And we've forgotten that. We've forgotten it. Another thing we've forgotten today is gratitude. We've forgotten what it means to be grateful. I mean, a lot of times you feel grateful. This is my point today. Gratitude is unknown if not expressed. You can go home now. That's what I'm trying to say. That's the main thing what I'm trying to say. Gratitude is unknown if not expressed. And we've got this story that talks about this. But if you don't say your thank you, if you don't do something in response to something that somebody's done for you, that means they experience ingratitude. Because if you don't say something or do something, they don't know that you're really grateful. Feeling grateful is not the same thing as being grateful. When I was a church planter, we started a church, my wife and my 3 kids, 3 boys, and we started from scratch, okay? We had like just us. And we built it up over a period of time. But in the beginning, we didn't have any support coming in much. And so I took a couple of jobs. I would do odd jobs. I worked for Mr. Rogers Windows, which was a good experience. I worked different places. And one of the things that I had a buddy of mine ask me if I wanted to come help him. There's this guy that he was a prominent builder in the area in Hampton Roads, and he had a big house mansion on the beach in the Outer Banks, and it was in the winter, and he wanted a new fence around the outside of it. And so my buddy said, do you want to come help me make this fence? It'll take us a week, and we're going to live in the house there on the beach and work outside every day. And it was kind of cold, but it was nice. I said, sure, let's do it. So I went to do it, and I was out there working with him, and one day I went in to go to the restroom, and the owner showed up, the guy that owned the house, and when he saw me, he saw I was working on the fence, and the first thing he said, hey, get my bags and take them up to the third floor. He didn't say please. He didn't say thank you. And, I came to build the fence, but I did it, but the whole time I was doing it, I'm just being honest, okay? In my head, I'm thinking, I went to college for 4 years, I have 2 masters, and I have a PhD, and I'm carrying this guy's bags who's perfectly fine, and I was thinking these thoughts. But what it made a difference in my life, and it still does, is this idea that you need to be grateful. You need to be thankful. Don't ever ask somebody to do something and expect them to do it because you're paying them. You don't even have to say thank you or please. That's just not the way to live. And we're going to look here at a story that is exactly an example of this. And it teaches us. It's what Jesus tells us in Luke. Luke chapter 17, beginning in verse 1. Now, this is when Jesus had been traveling through his ministry, and he was on his way going to Jerusalem, and he's coming near the end of his ministry, and he'd been in Galilee area, and now he's traveling towards Jerusalem. And it says in verse 11 of chapter 17, it says, now on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. And so he's traveling on the border. I've got a map here that shows where Samaria is in Galilee, and there's a second map that shows the place where the next map shows where that border was. And he was traveling this. This was not a place that most Jews ever went. Jesus didn't just stay in churches and go to listen to Christian radio and go to Christian concerts and go to Christian retreats and hang out with only Christians. He was where people were. And he was on the borderland here. And he was reaching people and ministering to people. And it says, as he was going there in this area, he went into a village, and there were 10 men in this small village who had leprosy, and they met him at a distance. Now, leprosy came to be known Hansen's disease later on, and it was a terrible thing to go through. Now, in that day, sometimes this word for leprosy meant scaly, and it could encompass different kinds of skin problems. But mainly in the Old Testament and the New Testament, leprosy was this disease, like Hansen's disease. In Leviticus 13 and 14, it talks about this guy that had. It says, anyone with such a defiling disease must wear torn clothes, let their hair be unkempt, and cover the lower part of the face, and cry out, unclean, unclean. As long as they have the disease, they remain unclean. They must live alone. They must live outside the camp. So it was a disease of impurity. In the Old Testament, King Uzziah disobeyed God's law, and God gave him leprosy until the time of his death. Gehazi, who was in the Old Testament, when he disobeyed God, was smited. That's what God, he smited him with leprosy forever as a punishment. And it was a terrible malady. Leprosy causes you not to feel, kind of like some other forms of diseases. It makes you feel numb to things. Sharon, what do they call it when it makes you numb? Neuropathy, that's it. That's the word I couldn't remember. Neuropathy. And you can't feel it. And so you could hurt yourself, like you could step on a nail and you wouldn't feel the nail going into your foot. And so you walk around all day with a nail in your foot. And you look down, you take your sock off and it's got blood all over it. And then your foot gets infected because you've been walking around with a nail in it. And so then you lose your foot. And so this is the kind of thing that leprosy was. And it affected all parts of your body, even affected your voice. Your voice would get really sounding kind of like this because it wasn't strong anymore. It would affect your organs, and so it was a terrible thing. And they put them away from the community because that was contagious, even though we now know that leprosy, 95% of the people who get contact with a person who has leprosy will not get it. So it's not very contagious. You have to be very sick yourself because then your resistance is low and then you might get it. But it was not as contagious as they thought it was. And so these 10 guys were in this community outside the town, and they were at a distance, and they called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." And when he saw them, immediately he said, "Go." And I wonder when he first said go, if they were thinking, yeah, he's telling us to go away. But no, he doesn't just say go. He says, go, show yourselves to the priest. And as they went, they were cleansed. Now, they were not cleansed before he told them to go. And so when he first told them to go show themselves to the priest, they probably were thinking, they're the last people on earth that want to see us. We're lepers. But he says, go. And evidently they had heard about Jesus and that he could heal people. And so they thinking to themselves, well, I guess we go. Maybe something will happen. And so they went and they were cleansed. Their bodies were free from leprosy. They could feel things again. No more tingly hands, no more tingly feet, no more problems with your face or your hearing or your voice. And one of them, when he saw he was healed, he came back praising God in a loud voice. I can imagine his vocal cords had been cured. And so he is whooping. Tony had a little whoop this morning before the service. And it made him feel better that he could praise God in a loud voice. And he threw himself at Jesus' feet and he thanked him. And here's the kicker. He was a double loser. Not only was a leper, he was a Samaritan. Which, by the way, did Samaritans go to priests? Never. So for him to go to show himself to the priest, I don't know, but he was doing it because God told him to do it. Jesus told him to do it. And Jesus' response, were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? And in Greek, it's reverse order, and he says, the 9 where? It's that short and clear. Jesus says, the 9 where? They have not come back to say thank you. It says, no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner. Now, the word for foreigner right here is a word that is often used to keep people out of parts of the temple. In fact, the word is allegenos. Allegenos. And around the temple, it had these signs that said, no allegenos. No allegenos. Because you could not go into the temple if you were a foreigner, if you weren't Jewish. So no allegenos. And so here this person, which is looked upon as a negative kind of person, He is the one that came back. And Jesus says, has no one returned but this Alleganus? And then Jesus says to him, he says, get up, rise up, go. Your faith has made you well. Which says a little bit something about the role of faith in how God works in your life. But he says, your faith has made you well. Now, the word here for made you well, it's sozo. That means saved, okay? The word means saved. So not only were 9 healed, 1 was saved. 1 was healed and saved. And that's a big deal. He says, not only are you healed, but you are saved. And what a great blessing. And so I want to bring up a few things about this. Okay, the first thing I want to bring up is a healing occurred during the act of obedience. There was something about the mindset of this guy that followed Jesus, and actually all 10 of them, they followed even though they didn't know for sure what was going to happen. And a lot of times in our lives, we need to kind of step out in faith even though we don't have proof that God is going to provide. There's a midrash, a story about the Old Testament that says when Moses parted the Red Sea, he jumped in it before it actually parted because it was an act of faith. Now, I don't know if that really happened, but I do know in this case, healing occurred because they obeyed first and then the healing happened. And oftentimes, your mindset, the way you go into something has an effect. I heard of the story of this 92-year-old guy that he was basically, he couldn't see. He was blind, and but he was sharp, and his mind was perfect. His wife, Eleanor, died. And he couldn't be alone anymore. It happens all the time. I see it happen all the time. And so they decide they're going to put him in a nice senior adult home, a place to live. And on the morning of the move, he was up and fully dressed with a tie by 8 a.m. And the lady that came to pick him up and talk to him, her name was Miranda, and she described the room that he was going to in great detail. She said, let me tell you where you're going and how great it is. And she started to tell him all these things about how great the room was and how his walker get through the hallways and how sunlight came through the big windows, and it was a comfortable couch and a nice desk. And right in the middle of all this description, John interrupted and said, I love it. I love it. And she laughed and she said, we're not even there yet. You haven't even seen it. I need to show it to you. He said, you don't have to show it to me. Whether I like my room or not doesn't depend on how the furniture is arranged. It depends on how my mind is arranged. And happiness is something you decide ahead of time. And so if you're thinking right now, oh, Thanksgiving is going to be terrible this year, stop it. Stop it. You know, the way you expect it coming. Do you know that many people decide on Monday they're going to be stressed out? Before Monday ever comes, when the alarm goes off, oh, it's Monday. They had the Monday morning blues. Some of you may have them tomorrow. There's a study that said that there are more heart attacks on Monday than any other day. Why is that? It's your mind. Monday's not different. I mean, somebody did a study and happiness goes up 10% in our country on Fridays. It's just a day. What's different about Friday than Monday? It's our attitude. You know, and these 10 lepers, they were trusting God, even though they had not been healed. They decided, well, we're going to go ahead and trust him, an act of obedience. And sometimes, even though you don't know that it's all going to work out, you step out in faith anyway. That's why they call it faith. And so I'm trying to encourage us to raise our faith levels. Faith, our expectation of the future. How's your faith today? Second, it's the least likely one that is thankful in this story. And I have found that to be the case often in life. The people that you would least likely think they would be people of faith wind up being people of faith. Here we had this guy who was a Samaritan and he was a leper, he was a double loser. And yet he's the one that had stronger faith than the people who were leaders in the church in Israel. They were going to the temple to meet God after they were healed, but the truth is that God hadn't been in the temple in a long time. God was in the person of Jesus Christ. And that's where the leper went. That's where the Samaritan went. He went to him. He was the least likely person. This one that they had these signs outside the temple that said, no Alleganus, he's Alleganus. I thought it was interesting that among this group of Jews, they let a foreigner, Alleganus, in their group. Sometimes when people are suffering through something really hard, they will partner up with people who are much different than they would hang with if they weren't sick. And this least likely one is thankful. When I was a youth minister, we did this kind of trick on the youth group one weekend. We were going to do this winter retreat. And so this guy that was going to speak, he was going to be on helping others and how to see other people. So he had this idea. He dressed up like a bum. I mean, he was wearing terrible clothes. He smelled rotten, and he was really kind of nasty. And so on the trip, I was driving the van, and we had put him on the side of the road on the trip. Okay, and as I'm driving around, I said, hey, guys, see that guy? He looks like he's some help. So you think we ought to stop? And somebody said, yeah, let's stop. I stopped and let him in the van. Okay, and the guy got in the van. I mean, he smelled bad. Everybody, all the young people in the van scooted to one side. And all in the front left him in the back. And this guy played it to the T. He took out his cigarettes and crumped up the cigarette package. It was empty. He threw it on the floor, and nobody would talk to him. We stopped at McDonald's, and one kid, my roughest kid, his name was Burr, and his name fit Burr, middle school boy, gave me trouble no end, never listens, always talking, always fussing. Burr went up to the guy and gave him money to eat something at McDonald's. Was nice to him. The one that was least likely was the one who had faith. So don't ever think that you know, this person seems to be godly and that person just by the way they look. Okay, it's the heart that God looks at, not the outside. 3, unexpressed gratitude communicates ingratitude. I've listened to people preach this sermon before on this text, and they talk a lot of times about how the other 9 were just really lowlifes, jerks, weren't grateful. You know, I wonder if you went up to those 9 guys who got healed and you said, hey guys, what happened? How are you? I bet you they would say, oh, we are so thankful that we're healed. We're so thankful that Jesus healed us. We're thankful for that. And I think maybe they were thankful, but guess what? Jesus never heard it. And so for Jesus, they weren't. If you are grateful for something somebody's done for you, but you don't say it, it doesn't count. You don't do anything about it, it doesn't count. And by the way, it doesn't count if you go to some other person. For instance, have you ever met a family in which the husband never bragged about his wife in front of her, but whenever he was around his buddies, he would say something good about her? Or maybe his kids. He never said to his kid how much he's proud of them or how much he thought about them, but when he's around his buddies, he's always bragging about his kids. What happens if you're a kid and you hear your dad saying that about you behind your back? For some kids, you would get resentful. Well, why didn't he say that to me in person? He's only saying it behind my back to others, like I'm his trophy. And it works the same way for kids. You get things from your parents, and you say, oh, yeah, thanks, whatever. You need to be thankful. Express thankfulness. They buy you lunch at Taco Bell. Thank you, Mom, for Taco Bell. It was great. You need to do that. We've forgotten to do that. We need to be thankful. And it doesn't take a lot of money to do it. That's what's got screwed up about Christmas. It's all about what you get and how much is it and what you give, and do you give something the same price as whatever they gave you, and it becomes way out of whack. And they come on the news and say, oh, it's a bad Christmas this year. People just aren't going in debt and spending. Oh, man, that's not the purpose of it all, guys. It's you can be grateful in different ways. There was a guy that I met several years ago. His name was Terry Riddle, and he was pastor of this wonderful church in Portsmouth. Wonderful church, and they did a lot of kind of mission stuff. And he went on a mission trip with the people in his church to Nicaragua, to the small little town in Nicaragua. Poor people. And there was these people, and they lived in little shacks, corrugated tin that would be blown away with the least wind. And his wife, who was a fabulous person, Terry's wife, had packed in his suitcase these little toys that children would like. And most of the people in the town were children. There's lots of children. And so he had these little toys, and he would give them out, some of the kids, and they were so thankful. But one boy, he said, there was this one boy, and he said he had the one toy left, and he gave this toy to the boy, and the boy looked at it and cried a little bit, and he said, oh, wait a minute. And he ran back in his house, in his room, and he got a sticker that he had in his room, and he came outside with a sticker, and he peeled it off, and he put it on Terry's shirt. He gave back. And I have heard Terry tell that story, and he can't tell it without crying, by the way. The idea of this boy who had nothing came back and gave me something because he just wanted to, out of joy. And this time of year, way back from when it began with the Pilgrims, it was about being thankful to God for what he's given. And we need to be thankful. We need to express our thanksgiving. Here's a few ways you could express your thanksgiving to God. Let your first thought when you wake up be, thank you, Jesus. When you wake up, don't think, oh, Lord, it's Monday. Let your first thought be, thank you, God, it's Monday. Second, give thanks for your meals. It used to be every restaurant you go in, you see people praying before they eat. But now, rarely. Rarely. And you don't have to make a big deal of it. You don't have to stand up and do it out loud. But you could quietly maybe hold hands with whoever you're with and say a prayer thanking God. Thank God for every good thing that happens in your life. Just go make it a habit to be constantly thanking. This week, as we're going through this week, I got a lot. Our family has a lot going on this week. I got a birthday. I got Thanksgiving, and all our families are getting together in a house in Northern Virginia, and then we have a wedding. John's getting married Saturday. So I'm looking forward to a week of high-calorie intake. And it's going to be great. It's going to be cakes and turkey and all the things I like to eat. And I'm excited about that. And I'm excited about being with all of our family. I'm excited about doing the wedding for my son, who's marrying a wonderful person. I'm excited about that. And it just gives me joy. I'm very thankful right now. And I don't know what it is you're thankful for today, but I know all of us have a reason to be thankful. And so I pray, you got this sign here, okay? I thought about carrying it around with me wherever I went today, but I can't get it in my pocket. This is the message.